South African government has drawn harsh criticism from countries that vehemently oppose President Vladimir Putin of Russia, who has been waging a war in Ukraine for more than a year. Its actions have also been decried by industry leaders in South Africa who warn that its closeness to Russia threatens South Africa's membership of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which is the trade program, which allows South Africa duty-free access to the U.S. for some produce. The South African Reserve Bank also issued a warning about South Africa's stance on the Russian invasion, sounding an alarm on the risk of sanctions. So, how do firms leverage human capital in the face of political uncertainty? Vumile Msweli, award-winning CEO of Hesed Consulting, career coach, joins us from Johannesburg to discuss further. Vumile, good to see you. Good morning to you. How do you assess the level of impact of political uncertainty on business operations and strategy?
I think it's becoming very, very clear, Rotus, here from a very chilly Johannesburg. What we are noticing is that in the face of political instability, we are starting to lose human talent across the country, specifically in the senior executive space. Of course, this is not something new for South Africa. Every time there's a bit of political instability, we're accustomed to people saying they're leaving the country. What's interesting about the trends coming out now is that it's no longer Caucasian South Africans, but in essence, Black African South Africans also now starting to look offshore for opportunities due to political instability.
I can't get over your jacket and scarf and how cold it is there in a country on the African continent. It still blows my mind. But yes, Johannesburg does get pretty cold. What role, Vumile, does effective communication play in managing employees' concerns and expectations during political uncertainty?
I think it's critical, Rotus. Of course, I know it's very, very cold in Johannesburg. Of course, it's very, very important that as an organization, you're able to communicate effectively. But in communicating effectively, it also means your policies and your framework need to change if you're going to retain some of that talent. Some of the benefits of having your employees actually in country are some things that you're now going to have to be able to negotiate. We're seeing some trends, of course, from organizations like MTN getting a little bit more flexible about where people can work, but still being tied to the South African office. If you're trying to keep South Africans here in the face of political instability, as an organization, you're most likely going to lose talent that is a little bit more seasoned, but it does give opportunity for young talent that perhaps doesn't have as much experience or exposure, but can definitely add value to help you be able to sustain some of the political turmoil that we are facing in the country.
Now, what about engagement with stakeholders, Vumile, such as not just employees, customers, suppliers, regulators, investors in time of political uncertainty? How's the communication handled that way?
What's been interesting, what we're seeing in South Africa, specifically with our large organizations who do have financial direct investments from companies specifically outside of the continent, we're seeing a lot more investor relations starting to happen. We're seeing more frequent engagements. No longer a case of we'll only talk to you when the dividends are being announced, but a lot more, this is what's happening, this is what's on ground, this is how we're planning to mitigate. So monitoring those industry trends, not just for your particular corner of the world, but across the globe becomes important. Then being very honest about where we are as a country and the actual risks and how to mitigate. What we are also starting to see is a number of smaller to medium-sized organizations starting to outsource where they're actually domiciled. We're seeing some trends with a lot of interest from people starting to say, listen, I'd rather be domiciled outside in states like Delaware in the US, where if there's any political turmoil, it's not going to impact how my investors actually view me whilst I continue to work in South Africa. So these are trends we've never seen before. And of course, this is following the trends of a lot of money leaving the country from personal capacity perspective, with our South African Revenue Services starting to note that they are very concerned about how much we're actually going to generate in revenue with so many people starting to, in essence, sort of prevent themselves from being exposed to the political instability by hedging themselves in their currency.
And how would you foster a culture of resilience, adaptability, and innovation among your workforce to cope with and respond to this, political uncertainty after you've gotten past the communication part?
So the first piece is you need to encourage knowledge sharing and mentoring. So being honest and saying this is what's happening in our organization, this is where we actually can add value as an organization. That becomes very, very important to ensure that there's an essence in institutional knowledge as opposed to key man dependencies. The second is having agile training and development programs. That becomes also very, very important to help foster resilience. Then, of course, adapting performance management systems. This becomes important even from a reward perspective. So we're seeing organizations start to become a little bit more creative than how they used to be. So a case of here, I'm just going to sign the check to try and keep you to stay is not going to be enough. It's looking at different levers, like looking at equity, like looking at greater power towards employees than before, more exposure to decision-making bodies like the boards. All of this becomes important in helping to foster resilience and try and retain some of the talent that potentially could go offshore.
Okay, great. So I like what you mentioned there. Giving them more power, also giving them more decision making. So if I was to ask you about how a corporation would invest in the development and well-being of human capital to enhance performance and retention during times of political instability, are those part of your answers then?
Definitely. Employee wellness plays a key part. Political power within the organization plays a key part, specifically in the senior echelons. That becomes important. Flexibility as to what you actually allow for your employees, from benefits, from wellness, from remuneration, all of that becomes important. And it has to then become a strategic long-term goal. I suppose the best example that we can borrow is from what's recently happened with Messi in the US, where all of a sudden it's not a case of this is what we're going to do, something we've always done before, but how can we structure something that's never been done before to help retain our people? So getting creative becomes critical. So whether you're like they used, the likes of Apple for streaming and giving benefits here and there, looking at a future focus that is more collaborative in a win-win situation, that is what we need to focus on if we're going to be successful in keeping our talent.
Great stuff. Vumile Msweli, CEO, Hesed Consulting, award-winning career coach. Thank you so much for talking to us about the impact of political instability on human capital and how firms can navigate their way around that with their employees. Thank you so much.